Your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
And that's right. As he said, we are the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes injury lawyers, and we are back as we are every Tuesday with FLA Law live on the radio. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you are a faithful listener, but if not, thank you for joining us tonight. Share with your friends and family. Let them know that FLA Law is live on the radio. It's a live legal call-in talk show where you can call in and get your legal questions answered live on the air with two attorneys here to answer your calls. And of course, I have a special co-host with me tonight, my partner, Brian Caulfield. And I will, of course, give him a chance to introduce himself again to our audience. Hopefully, if you're faithful listeners, then you're very familiar with who he is, and he's always here to give great legal advice. But before we do that, let's give you the rundown of the show and how you can get your calls and questions in tonight. As we said, we are the personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. We host a show every Tuesday, oldest injury law firm in the Tampa Bay area, and we specialize in personal injury. So tonight's show is going to be focused on personal injury law and civil litigation matters. However, we also bring on guests from time to time throughout the month of other areas of law. But tonight you got Brian and myself who are going to be answering some personal injury law questions for you. So to get your questions in tonight, the best way to do that will be to call in live to the studio at 727-441-3000. Again, the call-in number to get your questions answered live on the air is 727-441-3000. If you don't have a question, but you think your mom, aunt, uncle, sister, brother, they might have a question, give them the number, have them call in, and we'll be happy to answer their questions tonight. Now, if you're a little bit shy, you don't want to hear yourself on the radio, but you do have a question and you want to get it in, you can do that on our live stream. So we are streaming live right now on Facebook and on YouTube. If you want to find those live streams so you can see us in the studio and comment your questions in the chat box feature, just search Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes injury lawyers on either Facebook or YouTube, and that'll bring up our live feed. We are streaming right now. Then you can comment your questions down at the bottom, and then I'll read those out over the air for Brian and I to kind of tackle those questions for you. And even if it's not an area law that we practice in, we can at least kind of point you in the right direction, let you know what kind of attorney you probably will need for whatever the issue is. If you don't know how to spell it, Perenich is Perenich. If you type that in, you should see Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes injury lawyers pop up. There'll be a little red circle around our logo that shows that we are live. Click on that, and then you'll be able to see us in the studio. And you can comment your questions at the bottom. Share this feed with your friends as well. So if you're on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, do all those great things. And you can see us every Tuesday at 5. With that being said, Brian, good to have you with me.
Thank you for having me, Jacqueline. Look forward to answering the callers' questions. So any questions that you have, the law office is open, live, and free for the next 1 hour.
Exactly right. And don't wait till the end because, of course, as we get going, attorneys, we can talk, and we want to give you time to get the full response to your questions. So if you call right at 5:59, then unfortunately we won't be able to give you a full response. So get that call in now. The lines are open. Feel free to call in with your legal questions, and we'll tackle those. Now, tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about just the holidays and different things that can come up around this wonderful time of year. But of course, as we go on, we may jump into other civil litigation topics or auto accident related topics. But if you have a burning question, maybe it's about premises liability or slip and fall or a nursing home negligence, medical malpractice, and it's not necessarily what we're talking about at the moment, that's okay. Give us a call, and we will certainly address those questions for you as we go along. If you just have a comment, maybe it's not a question, but you want to join into the conversation, you can do that too. So with that being said, how are you, Brian?
I'm doing great. How are you doing tonight, Jacqueline?
Good. Have you got your Christmas shopping done?
I was just thinking of an announcement I heard on the radio that there's like 7 days left before Christmas, 7 shopping days. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry to report that I'm a little behind the 8 ball here, but I'm going to to do a quick catch up this weekend.
Like, if I had to guess, I probably would have guessed that. But look, I'm not a Christmas Eve shopper. I can't do it. I can't wait till the last minute. But I know a lot of people do. And look, it's just the nature of it. People are busy. We have jobs, lives, things that we do. And so everybody's going to be out there on Christmas Eve or the day before, or even this weekend. It's probably one of the busiest shopping times, I would imagine. Piling into the malls and the shopping centers and all the places. And it'll be so much heavy traffic in those areas. And I can guarantee you we're going to see some accidents in some of those heavy areas like International Mall and West Shore and maybe Tyrone. That's a little dead nowadays, but even Tyrone gets super busy around this time of year where there's cars everywhere and people aren't necessarily paying the most attention. And you've got these tight spaces, you're maneuvering in and out, and boom, a car accident happens in the parking lot. Is there anything that you would advise or tips that you would give people if they find themselves involved in a parking lot impact, which is obviously a little different than on, just the traditional roadways or highways?
Yeah, well, sure. Hopefully, the accident is of a low enough velocity that there'll only be property damage to the vehicles. But, many of the same issues and problems you face when you have a car accident case on the road transfers over to parking lots. And the first thing is liability.
Mm-hmm.
Before you can make any recovery in the state of Florida for either injuries to yourself or to your vehicle, you have to prove the other party was at fault. So just like when you get in an accident on the road, to the extent there are witnesses, you really need to try to collect witness information, because otherwise you're in the classic he said, she said type of position.
Yeah.
And that makes, your case more difficult. In this day and age, there obviously is a lot of video surveillance. And so obviously, if you do get into an accident and you're unable to solicit an admission by the other party that they were at fault, then you have to think about proving your case. That means you should be, trying to get the names of all the witnesses, go into the mall and or the closest store to see if you can kind of get the surveillance video, which, many times is tough to get. They'll always just give that out to people.
Yeah.
But, you can work on, its preservation. And when you call the police, you can have the police. They'll give it to the police, but many times they won't give it to you.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I've had that situation even personally.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that out the hard way. So that's probably the biggest thing is just because it's in a parking lot and, doesn't mean necessarily that it's an automatic thing. You've got to prove liability in those cases, just like you do when you have an open road type accident.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are going to assume that, oh, well, there was cameras everywhere. There'll be some footage that'll capture this incident. But unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Yeah, no, we know that, don't we? Because we have a lot of, cases of indoor slip or trip and falls.
Mm-hmm.
And, number one, I've had cases where I've been unlucky enough where the accident happens just off of the video surveillance field.
Yep.
Number two, you also are at kind of the mercy of the very defendant that you're making a claim against,
Mm-hmm.
who, they're obviously supposed to be responding to you in good faith and under oath when you ask for surveillance. But when they say, no, we don't have it, or it got taped over, or, these kinds of things. So, surveillance video really has been one of the most kind of important things that I've seen in my 36-year career, because I've had a number of cases, including very, very substantial wrongful death cases, motorcycle accidents where the motorcyclist is killed.
Yeah.
And you really need the surveillance video to tell the story. And I know I acquired one from, a U-Haul place.
I was going to say, you got a very, very lucky with that storage unit.
Yeah, I got very lucky with that. And then I got very lucky with one, a trailer park that,
Mm-hmm.
a man and woman lived in the trailer park, and the trailer park's own video ended up being what proved they were not at fault for an accident that killed both of them. So surveillance has really, really, exploded, obviously.
Yeah.
Kind of first probably used to try to make sure stores aren't getting shoplifted, so to speak,
but shrink.
Yeah, but very quickly, their use expanded to be very important in what we do.
Absolutely. That's why it's important to call an attorney right away, especially when it's a situation like that where there may be a dispute in liability or the other driver's kind of pointing the finger and you don't necessarily have the video, but you believe it exists, then you should employ an attorney right away. Give us a call because we will have those tools and opportunities to be able to preserve that evidence, as Brian mentioned, or to employ individuals to go out and try to obtain that evidence where you might not be able to do that on your own, or you might get turned away. But like Brian said, sometimes they're just not going to give it unless you're law enforcement, even if they have it. So it's best to, obtain an attorney and allow us to do the investigation early, because at some point it may be detrimental because you waited and now that evidence no longer exists. A lot of these, stores and companies, or even, smaller, privately owned companies, they only keep their video for so long and it gets recorded over and it's not preserved after a certain period of time. And so as you can imagine, as time goes on, so does the evidence starts to deteriorate. But I also think dash cams have gotten really popular these days too. And so if you're still trying to figure out what to get people for Christmas, I would say add that.
I think that's totally true.
List. Buy your family and friends dash cams for Christmas, because to me those are actually becoming very, very helpful tools in proving liability and resolving liability disputes. When those arise, when accidents happen, not necessarily because someone is not being truthful, it's just they don't know what happened. We're not sure how the accident happened, and the only way to determine that is sometimes by dash cam video or some other independent surveillance. So think about that on your Christmas list, folks, when you're buying gifts for your family. But with that being said, collecting of evidence is crucially important, I think, in these parking lot cases, and to make sure you have that, because even to go back to the video, even showing the force of the impact, I think, is also really important, because I think, Brian, you'll agree with me that they sometimes characterize parking lot accidents as being minor, or
fender benders,
benders, low impact. Oh, just a little bit of paint transfer on the cars that that couldn't have possibly caused any real injury, which is very far from the truth. And so if you have that kind of video that shows everything in your car kind of shifting towards the front, or your body being thrown, back and forth, or just the sheer impact of it, I think that's extremely helpful.
Yeah, I agree totally. I mean, it is amazing when you actually see, a kind of full rendition of what happens in a low-speed collision, because, a lot of times the insurance company can say, oh, it was, quote, just a fender bender, as though the forces necessary to bend metal wouldn't be able to achieve the ability to tear your soft tissue.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful, and it's one more use. It helps you prove causation and damages as well.
Absolutely right. So, of course, everyone be safe out there when you're shopping. If you are like Brian and I, and you have not completed your shopping list, be safe, be alert, and collect the possible evidence you need if in the event you do find yourselves in, some sort of a car accident that results in injuries. And of course, you can always give us a call at 727-796-8282. Even during the holidays, you can still call us and we'll be happy to walk you through that. With that being said, tis the season for lots of parties and exciting festivities where drinking and socializing is obviously the fun part of this season, but it always comes with certain liabilities as well. And so, of course, as the lawyer in me, the liability attorney and personal injury lawyer in me, is thinking of all the things that could happen when you throw parties and you have fun and, do those things that everyone does during this time of year, but can sometimes go wrong, right, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, every Christmas, there's always, Christmas party antics that take place. And unfortunately, sometimes bad things happen after Christmas parties. And, people leaving the party end up in very severe accidents. And so then you have a question of liability. Who is responsible for an accident? So I guess we should talk a little bit about that, Jacqueline. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what we call the dram shop law in Florida?
Absolutely. I could do that. So I've got our dram shop law, and then it also talks about, social host laws. So just to, of course, bore you for a second, but give you the law, dram shop is Florida Statute 768-125, which is originally was enacted to hold anyone selling alcohol to an underage individual liable for legally serving those underage individuals that cause an accident or injuries while in their intoxicated state. This law was written so that anyone who knowingly sells alcohol to an individual with a known drinking problem is also liable for serious accidents or injuries caused by them while under the influence of alcohol. The overserving of alcohol law is fundamental to the requirement of official identification to prove legal age before the sale of alcohol and the refusal to sell alcohol products to anyone appearing to be physically intoxicated. So according to the statute, liability for injury or damage resulting from intoxication says, person who sells or furnishes alcoholic beverages to a person of lawful drinking age shall not thereby become liable for injury or damage caused by or resulting from the intoxication of such person, except that a person who willfully and unlawfully sells or furnishes alcoholic beverages to a person who is not of lawful drinking age, or who knowingly serves a person habitually addicted to the use of any or all alcoholic beverages, may be liable for injury or damage caused by or resulting from the intoxication of such minor or person. So that's kind of the dram shop law in a nutshell. The social host law looks like it may be a little bit different. And that says, let's see, they won't be held liable legally under Florida's dram shop laws, except when providing packaged alcohol or alcoholic beverages to underage guests. So in this instance, the social host may face legal sanctions or even criminal penalty if a serious accident occurs. And that goes on to state that they can enforce suspending the driver's license of a social host who provides alcohol to a minor. And let's see, there may be some other criminal liability. If found guilty, could face up to 6 months for the first violation or a year subsequent violation, and then a license revocation. So there is some subject to some prison time as well.
Yeah, it is interesting the way Florida comes at it as you read that statute. They're really, when people talk about this, they say that there is, no liability to the bar, and it's really an exception to the rule.
Right.
That statute really was kind of a law to protect the purveyors of alcohol and to hold them liable only in two very discrete situations. One where they willfully and unlawfully serve a minor. And that doesn't mean, that it's enough for you to civilly prove liability by saying, hey, they fell for this fake ID. You have to prove that they willfully, that is, that they knew the person that they sued was underage and sued him anyway. So how do you go about proving such a thing?
You anticipated my question. I'm like, what about fake IDs, Brian?
Yeah, well, and the fake ID, if, it's not going to be enough to show that the person got the alcohol with a fake ID. That doesn't automatically make the person that accepted that fake ID liable. What you have to have is evidence that the person that served knew that person was underage. Mm-hmm. So there are some cases in Florida where, for example, the person doing the serving was in the same graduating class as the person they served, who later was involved in one of these accidents. So in that particular case, the bartender had specific knowledge that this person they were serving to was in fact underage. So that's what willful and unlawful means. And then the second kind of exception is you knowingly serve a person habitually addicted to the use of alcohol. And that can be proven. There have been cases in Florida. They were fighting about, well, do you have to have a letter to the bar that says, don't serve my Uncle Jimmy, he's an alcoholic? And the answer is no. As a matter of fact, you can kind of prove that circumstantially. We've had cases where we've been able to prove, utilizing experts, that someone that was ordering doubles on such a frequent basis is likely a person who's habitually addicted to the use of alcohol.
The regular.
And then other ways you'd prove it, of course, is by the very staff themselves, and then looking at that person's kind of record, their credit card records, how much they were drinking, the old receipts, the types they were drinking, interviewing bartenders to say, oh yeah, I know this guy. He comes in every day at 5:00 and he orders the following, 8 drinks over the next 4 hours.
Yeah.
So there are ways to prove it, but it is interesting. So we do want you to know that we are here live, and we do have an open line now. So if you'd like to ask a question related to personal injury, the law office is open. So please give us a call at 727-441-3000. Or if you're out of the greater Clearwater area and you want to do toll free, it's 1-866-826-1340. The law office is open, and you'll be able to get right through, and we'll do our best to try to answer your legal questions with an emphasis on personal injury and insurance law.
Absolutely. And I see we've got some viewers online. So if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, share this so that your friends and family who may have questions about this, maybe they're getting ready to host an extravagant Christmas party. They want to make sure they're, taking the right steps. You want to make sure you're aware of what the minors are doing at your party and being mindful of the children that are in attendance, keeping an eye on them, obviously not allowing minors to engage in alcohol. I can't begin to just think of the time they're like, oh, they're underage, but they're home. It's okay. Everybody's having a good time. As long as you're at home, it's all right. It's not okay. You obviously just read the statute, and I tell you what the statute says about serving minors. So
yeah, you're committing a crime when you're doing that.
Absolutely right. So before we take a short break, I wanted to go over this news story and this article that kind of plays right into that and is quite timely because he's just gotten sued. And so I wanted to read this article to you, Brian, about the basketball player James Harden, who's now been named in a civil lawsuit, or his restaurant, I should say, regards to quite a bad accident that occurred, and wanted to get your take on it and thoughts on how this, may be playing out. So bear with me for a second to kind of give you the rundown on what happened. It says the family of late NFL player DJ Hayden is joining a lawsuit accusing the restaurant of over-serving a driver who caused a crash that killed 7 people last year. The lawsuit accuses the staff at 13, and 13 is the name of the restaurant, of over-serving Christian Herrera back on November 11, 2023, according to the Houston Chronicle. The police say that Herrera ran a red light and T-boned another car, killing DJ Hayden and 6 other people, including a man who was walking nearby. It happened just a few blocks away from the restaurant 13, which is owned by former Houston Rocket point guard James Harden. As of Monday, the restaurant has not yet responded to the lawsuit. The victims are DJ Hayden, Ralph Orogu, Zachary McMillan, and they were all former University of Houston football players. The family of one of the victims filed a lawsuit first earlier this month. Her name is Taylor Jackson. And it looks like Jackson unfortunately passed several months after the accident due to her injuries. And then on December 9th, her mother filed the lawsuit alleging that Herrera was overserved at the restaurant shortly before the crash. And a portion of the lawsuit lays out why. Basically, it says that Herrera, which is the defendant, was served alcohol beyond the point of intoxication, which resulted in a blood alcohol concentration of 0.139. On that particular night, Herrera was served alcohol in excess, is what they allege. And he was obviously intoxicated to the extent that he presented a clear danger to himself and others. They go on to allege that the restaurant staff failed to track and record the number of drinks served to this particular patron, among other issues. And so they basically said that they will let the matter play out in court. And James Harden's company has not yet responded and are just now learning of the lawsuit and will make a formal statement later. So that's that. Now, obviously, we look at it through the lens of Florida law to see, what you think will occur here and whether or not there's legs to stand on.
Yeah, as you point out, first of all, the law in Texas is going to be different probably than the law in Florida, although you'd be surprised that we tend to follow a lot of what Texas has done.
Yeah.
And so these cases are very fact specific. So, if looking at it through the lens of Florida law, the question is really not just necessarily whether the person was overserved. The question is going to be whether or not that person was willfully and unlawfully served as a minor. And obviously that's easy to determine.
Sure.
If the person doesn't sound like they were a minor, then you have one prong of the liability is done. You're not going to win on prong one, so you go to prong two, which is, can you prove from the facts of the case that the restaurant staff knowingly served a person habitually addicted to the use of alcohol?
Right.
So there's going to be a ton of depositions that are not going to just talk about this time that the person was at the 13 restaurant.
Yeah.
More importantly, they're going to be talking about previous dealings with this individual. Mm-hmm. Did the bar staff there know that this was an individual with a problem, that he had an alcohol problem? They could know it just from talking to him. They might be able to elicit testimony that he had told people about how, he had been to AA meetings and things like that. So there's very fact specific, but if you're looking at that case under the lens of Florida law, they're going to have to shift their emphasis to proving that he was a person habitually addicted to the use of alcohol, mm-hmm. and that, whoever served him knew this. And that's the only way that case is going to succeed in the state of Florida. Just the mere fact that you so-called overserved somebody doesn't make you liable in the state of Florida.
Right. So it's not as easy as one might think. Just the mere fact of being overserved and that person then going out and causing, which was an extremely tragic accident, is not necessarily it. There has to be much more evidence to support that. But as Brian mentioned, it can be, proven through other ways. You don't necessarily need a direct proof of, okay, they had his medical records, they saw that he was an alcoholic. You don't necessarily need that. But constructively, it can be proven other ways. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Like you mentioned, Brian, there's so many celebrities these days that have restaurants. And so I would think they have to be thinking about this kind of liability.
Yeah, and I think,
when they get into
I know
this.
Tiger's got one of, steakhouse over on the other side of Florida, and his steakhouse was sued, for similar type claims.
Yeah. So obviously they've got great lawyers. So we'll see how these cases play out in the courts and what it ultimately happens. Wouldn't be surprised if we see some settlements coming out of that. So with that being said, I think it's a great time to take a short break, and the lines are open, folks. So you can give us a call. You have got two attorneys here willing to answer your questions live on the air. The call-in number is 727-441-3000. Give us a call. This is FLA Law live on the radio.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
I think so.
Oh, really?
So we're back live on the air with FLA Law live on the radio. That's right, folks. We are here with your live legal call-in talk show, answering your questions live on the air. Please feel free to call in. Give the number out to your family members and friends. Let them know that they have the opportunity until 6 o'clock to call in with their legal questions to have them answered live on the air. The number is 727-441-3000. Feel free to call in now. And also, we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. So you can drop your questions in the comment section down at the bottom, and we will read those out over the air as well. Feel free to share our live feed and our stream with others so that they can get their questions answered as well. So tonight, this is kind of our holiday-themed show. Tuning in, just giving you some things to think about during this holiday season. It's obviously one of the best times of the year, in my opinion. I enjoy it. But of course, there's always, things, as I think the word Brian used was antics, that can come about when you have parties and alcohol and all the wonderful things that come along with the season. And they can end up involving injuries, unfortunately. And so we want to make sure that people are informed and understand where liabilities might arise. So we talked about car accidents and different things in the shopping centers, and also, being a social host. But what about employers or, companies and those that clearly this time of year have their company party and their office luncheons and all those things where alcohol might be a part of that conversation? Where does that fall for them, Brian? Is it the same?
Yeah, I mean, basically it's the same. You have a situation where, whether or not they're negligent, by serving somebody, and that's going to, involve whether or not they knew of the person's age, that they were in fact serving a minor. A lot of times companies, they don't really want to take on any kind of liquor liability. So they'll go ahead and have their parties at a particular restaurant or bar and let those companies that, train their servers on how to deal with things, that kind of helps insulate them, from liability. Right. So, but you're still, you're still going to be in trouble if you, serve a minor employee and they go out there and they cause injury to themselves or other people. So it certainly is something that you have to be concerned about, because just because it's the holiday season doesn't mean the laws go into suspension.
Yeah, absolutely right. And then, people may not always consider the fact that, just because everyone appears to be adults doesn't mean that everyone actually working for you or your company is of age or drinking age. And so that's things to also think about and consider. And of course, if you're on the clock or it's on the office premises, you want to consider changing that in the sense that maybe you should do it, after hours, or, close the office or close the business down and then, shift over to another place so that, the fingers don't come back to you in the event that something like that happens. Because as Brian mentioned, you're not necessarily going to be trained in the same way that the office or the restaurant personnel, staff, and waitresses and servers would be when it comes to the serving of alcohol. With that being said, obviously, in the event that something like that were to occur, then you should obviously seek, an attorney if you end up being hit by someone and you realize that person says, "Oh, I was just coming back from my office Christmas party. I'm so sorry. I didn't," and they start making those kind of admissions at the scene. That's when you call an attorney and make sure you have all the right information and you get all the correct representation at that time, because I'm can assure you, individuals will change their stories, and the things that they said at that time may not necessarily be admitted later. So with that being said, let's talk about some other holiday exciting things. So we know this time of year, there's all kinds of light displays and parades and different things that I personally love to go out and do, especially with my 2 young children. But of course, you've got the light situation where you go out to these events, usually in the evening when it's quite dark, and there's all kinds of things that are bringing your attention away from necessarily the roads or the places that you're walking. So I wanted to kind of run this by you and get your thoughts on the different things that can occur, because there's these kind of drive-through displays where you can drive through and look at homes and look at different displays and kind of see that, and traffic can get backed up and people aren't always paying attention. And then there's the walking situation where you're walking through a parade route maybe, and you're not necessarily able to see the roadway and the potholes and the cracks and the different things in the pavement. So let's talk about those 2 things, because it's actually interesting, and I could be completely off, but because you've been doing this far longer than I have, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. And some of these big extravagant light displays, I'm not going to call out any names, but I know people that do this every year, and they encourage people to, come by and look at their homes, and it causes a lot of traffic, and it causes a big distraction on the roads. And what if accidents happen because of that? Have you seen anything like that, Brian, where, there's liability to the homeowner for creating this massive distracting display?
Yeah, I have seen a case like that in Pasco County years ago, where a person was doing this, and it got bigger and bigger every year, and it got bigger to the point that they started actually having people stop along the roadway and pull just off on the shoulder of the roadway, and then they would go up to the display, and they actually had kind of, food, drink, etc.
Yeah.
And so
Excellent.
literally they were making this incredible traffic jam, not to mention the fact that, when you had all these cars parked right on the shoulder, right up to the pavement, it made it very difficult for people to see as they were crossing the road. And so, there was a fatality, and there was a claim made against those people.
Wow.
So that can happen, super fact specific.
Yeah.
Generally, you want to look at, under negligence law, it's really what the law asks is, were you creating a foreseeable zone of risk by your actions? And so certainly, when you see that your displays are getting to the point that traffic is becoming unruly and things like that, that's why you see sometimes people will actually hire traffic control.
Yeah. Right.
So there's appropriate warnings up for people that are approaching that scene at too high a speed,
Right.
et cetera. So, you got to be very careful about it. Obviously, it's a wonderful thing.
It's so fun.
But what they say, too much of any good thing can be a bad thing.
You're absolutely
And so,
right.
I have seen, I've actually been involved in a case like that. But, generally you're not going to have a problem as long as you're staying off the roadway. But if you're doing things that is knowingly interfering with traffic and causing it to, back up, build up, and actually the longer you do it, the more you're creating a history where, you've
That's
had
what I was
accidents,
thinking. Yeah, the
and yet you
foreseeability.
continue to get bigger and try to attract more people, then you better start thinking about actions taken to alleviate traffic jams and, cars, basically with high beams on going by and making it difficult, to see a pedestrian crossing across the street because people are pulled off on the side with their lights on both directions, even though they're not on the roadway. And so someone kind of walks out between cars with the intent to get across the street to where the light display is. They get hit by a car and killed, you're potentially going to have a case. So I do think under certain circumstances that there could be liability.
Yeah. I remember there used to be this house, and I can't remember if it was old Southeast, I think, in St. Pete, that was it was popular for that time of year. But I think they did have a lot of that signage and that traffic control because it had been done for so many years. They probably learned that we've got to do a good job managing the traffic and the way it comes in and out of this neighborhood. And so there would be signs, for at least a half a mile back and coming into the neighborhood, letting you know where to park, where to stop, and to be alert and that sort of thing. And now that you mention it, I think that's probably why, because it was quite a big display with so much traffic that they just had to do that. Now, there's some places else that I don't know if they're doing that, but in Pinellas that I know that they sell, like you said, drinks and cocoa and all this kind of things. And it's something to think about when you're bringing people in. I think I got a flyer from my daughter's school, and it's like encouraging everybody to come see Santa at their home. And I'm thinking, oh, that sounds like a traffic nightmare. And I hope they're thinking about that kind of thing when you've got kids running around in the street at night and trying to get up to this house to see Santa. It just sounds like, I don't want to be the Debbie Downer here, but it sounds like something they want to think about. The best, traffic control when you have that sort of an attraction. Fun times, but still things to be aware of.
There's a spot in I think it's Largo, off of Belcher, and I know that every year, it's one of those streets that's just off Belcher, and the neighborhood has got together every year, and it's a cul-de-sac, so it's in and then out. And I think 6 homes on each side, and then the cul-de-sac, except they actually put one of the like PVC archways across the road.
Mm-hmm.
It got so bad, and I think it still is. I don't know if they made them. I heard they asked them to stop, but Largo PD had to come out on a nightly basis, and do traffic control, because you actually had people stopped on Belcher in the right-hand lane to go in, and then people coming out.
Yeah, it becomes a big traffic nightmare, and again, a recipe for, some sort of an accident to occur. And I think, as Brian mentioned, you open yourself up to liability with something like that. So just be mindful. I love the displays. I think it's great. I love taking my kids. As a matter of fact, I saw something over the weekend. There was this really nice house, but it was sitting on like a one-way street. And people were trying to go see it, I think. I don't know. But I saw multiple cars that kept going down the wrong way. And then they'd have to like make a U-turn and come back. And I'm like, ooh, they need better signage there to let people know that that's a one-way. You can't go down and look at that house from this direction. So just thing to be mindful of, folks. But love the displays. I think they're great. But just make sure if you're making it a big thing and you see that it's causing traffic and backups, to just kind of be mindful of that when you consider those things. Now, let's talk about the traffic in terms of foot traffic. So, obviously, certain sidewalks are going to be, in the public realm, I think, depending on where, the incidents occur. But if we're talking like parades, and, I know there's a boat parade, I think in Tampa and Gulfport. And Pinellas Park has a big holiday parade when you're kind of out at night, and you've got people looking at the displays and the floats, and they're not necessarily paying attention to the ground. And what do you know? I'm sure you've seen it time and time again. People fall, they trip. They're like, well, there were no cones. There was poor lighting. I couldn't see. It was at night. I wasn't paying attention. I was looking at the displays. Do they have a case in that kind of a situation?
Again, super fact specific. The first thing you're going to look at is what is the alleged premises defect that caused them to fall.
Yeah.
And from there, you can pretty much determine whether or not you're going to have a case. You talked about whether or not the person was, really taking appropriate steps for their own safety. And of course, here in Florida now, the law has changed, and we're really, really tough on premises liability cases, where even if the defendant was negligent, if they can prove that you were more than 50% at fault, even though they were negligent, they owe you nothing. So, those cases have become a lot more difficult in the state of Florida. But certainly, anytime something like that happens, the first question you have to ask is there a duty owed to this person? Are they in a particular place that they're allowed or supposed to be? And then secondarily, you're going to ask, what is the premises defect that caused them to actually fall? And then you're going to look to see whether or not it was properly warned about and whether or not it could have been, corrected on a timely basis, that the other side had knowledge or should have had knowledge that they created and maintained a foreseeably dangerous condition. So I've done an awful lot of trip and fall cases over the years, whether they be, on public sidewalks, whether or not they be at a particular business. Obviously we think of supermarkets a lot because, I can remember having, a case involving Albertsons where there was a grape on the floor, and my client ended up breaking her hip on that grape. And interestingly enough,
one of my first jobs was at Albertsons.
One of the things that I was able to establish in that case is that where they had the seedless grapes, the way that people would take them off the shelf, you shake them a little bit, and then they'd have a plastic bag provided by Albertsons to put them in. The bad news, however, was the bag was across the aisle.
Oh.
So the persons that are getting these seedless grapes have to go across the aisle to bag them. Yeah. And guess where my accident happened?
Across that aisle.
Yeah. And so, so I was able to, win that case. But again, it's all about what's the defect, was it preventable, and to what degree, and what was the conduct of your own client. So they are very, very interesting cases, and I know I've handled a lot of very different ones over the years.
Absolutely.
But I remember that one very well because that was such a nice older client.
Yeah. There's all kind of variations of it, and so a lot of things that we look at is obviously what was foreseeable or what they knew or should have known about, right? And so going back to kind of this parade scenario, if you're out at one of these, public events, obviously when they're setting up these type of events, they're usually doing it in the day, but then, the event could occur at night. So do you feel that, there's any duty to kind of inspect the parade route, if you will, for those kinds of dangerous defects or things that might be considered a hazard by the time the night kind of comes around where people can't see as well?
Yeah, I think, look, when you decide to become a so-called organizer, I think you definitely, kind of expand your liability. You talked about a boat parade. So, certainly when you're going to do a boat parade, then you better be careful about what's the route for that boat parade. For example, what's the tide?
Yeah.
You certainly don't want to knowingly have boats that have big draws, maybe they need 6-7 feet of water because they're really big and heavy and sit low in the water. And then you're sending, these boats into an area where the tide is so low, they're going to run aground. Someone falls off the boat, they drown. And yeah, you could have liability on that organizer because did they take reasonable steps to plan? And so there's, or they could fall over when they run aground, and the boat behind them runs them over. So, there's all kinds of, and obviously, there's drinking going on.
Yeah, for sure.
What's the protocol if someone falls in the water? Does everyone immediately put their boats into neutral until, so there's all kinds of things. So you have to kind of look. But the bottom line is, if you become an organizer of a parade or a big festival or something, you're going to have duties like ingress and egress.
Yeah.
There's cases here in Florida, for example, where, let's say you have a very popular bar on one side of the street and it's got a very small parking lot.
Yeah.
And they're running these promotions that are bringing in hundreds of people, and known to them as people start crossing and parking on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
And they're having to, run across a 4-lane highway to get to the business. And there's been liability extended in that kind of a case where
That's a great point.
They didn't really take appropriate steps to safeguard, their people that they were inviting to their business to give them a safe means of ingress and egress. And so, there's been liability in that kind of a case. So, the law is very fact specific, right? The law will give you kind of certain guidelines that you have to prove. And then ultimately a jury will determine whether or not under the facts of your case, the judge is going to initially approve it. But ultimately, if there's enough of an argument, then they let a jury decide.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about these, public entities or government entities when you've got, elevated slabs in the sidewalk where they're, sticking up an inch or more high and the tree uproots lifting those slabs or just clear big potholes in the street or things like that, and people that trip and fall potentially on these kinds of defects. And then you have, the city's responses, oh, we didn't know about it. We don't go out unless somebody tells us about it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's interesting, right? When they want to remain ignorant about something, and they'll actually testify. We don't go out looking for those defects. Well,
it was never reported.
Yeah, it's certainly we'd like the public to report it, but it's the city's duty. If it's a city sidewalk, they need to have appropriate plans so that they're going over their sidewalks.
Yeah.
And I've had cases like that where they say they don't know, but yet I'm able to prove that just 2 days before, the water line people were there spray painting right over, the big defect in the sidewalk and took no action.
Yeah.
Didn't do anything to put up cones around it, to notify the other department that would fix it.
Yeah.
So again, the stick your head in the sand defense isn't going to work. But municipalities rely heavily on the fact that they have sovereign immunity.
Yeah.
That is, that they have a limited amount of liability. And so they don't, in my mind, they don't tend to worry as much about it from what I've seen.
I think you're absolutely right. And, this could probably take up our last few minutes, but that's what I was seeing. And what I'm seeing here lately is that they'll say, well, that was a planning decision that we made. And we will not proactively go out and search for these things unless they're reported. Therefore, because it's a planning decision, I think I'm saying that right.
Yep.
We have no liability. We're immune. So, and that's the approach that I think a lot of them are now taking. So.
Yep, I see it all the time.
And that's unfortunate. And so if you find yourself in those kinds of situations where you're not sure who's responsible. I was at this lovely event and something not so lovely occurred. I fell. I got hurt. There was a defect. There was something dangerous. And I got photos of it. I have video of it. And you want to talk to an attorney about it, then you should absolutely give us a call and let us see what exactly happened and try to determine, is it a parade organizer? Is it a government entity? Is it a private homeowner? There's so many different things that we have to look at. But the best thing you can do is collect the evidence, take the photos, record the video, whatever you can do to preserve that, get the witnesses, and then, of course, give us a call. Now, of course, you won't call the radio station. You'll call us at our office at 727-796-8282. Brian, thanks so much for being my co-host tonight. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great legal mind, and hopefully you have learned something tonight. If not, we'll try again next Tuesday at 5, as we always do. Every Tuesday at 5 o'clock, it's FLA Law live on the radio. Folks, we will see you next week. Take care.